in 2017 and to say enough is enough and change starts with them. So if the House would please stand and make them welcome.
Gentleman from 22nd, Delegate Jeffries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today from Lincoln County, we have with us in the North Gallery Chief Jim Oldacre of the Allen Creek Fire Department, if he would stand, and Chief Doug Eplin with Morrisville Fire Department, if they'd both stand and the House make them feel welcome.
Gentleman from 22nd, Delegate Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today with us, we have chiefs from the West Virginia Fires Association and the West Virginia Fire Association. So if they would please stand and the House please make them feel welcome.
Gentleman from the 17th, Delegate Rohrbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the gallery we have visiting with us Shannon O'Connor. Now, she would stand. She's a student in occupational therapy at WVU and is also joining us this week as a Rural Health Scholar Program recipient, and we would ask for the House to make her welcome.
Gentleman from 32nd, Delegate Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Kessinger, Delegate Staggers, and myself, we have, I believe they're now in the South Gallery. They were in the North, but it's full, and I think they got transferred. Leadership Fayette County Leadership. It's an elite group of young students from Fayette County who are here to impress upon us great ideas for good legislation. They have great leadership among their group, and I'm so happy to have them. If you would please give these students from Fayette County a great welcome.
Gentleman from the 44th, Delegate Hanna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the West Gallery, I have with me a teacher from Nicholas County Career and Technical School and former teacher of my own, Lundy Bailey. Would the House please make him feel welcome?
Gentleman from the 34th, Delegate Boggs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very pleased to see in the South Gallery my old friend and one of the leaders truly in not only in Braxton County but in all of West Virginia as a volunteer firefighter and one of the chiefs, Randy James. Randy, if you would stand and the members would please make Randy welcome.
Gentleman from the 55th, Delegate Spinagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All the way from God's country, Hardy County, we got some of Moorfield's finest, Moorfield Volunteer Fire Department, company number 46. We got Doug Mongold. Stand up, Doug. We got Harry Shockey. Harry, stand up. Lance Taylor, stand up. And last but not least, Dalton Hours, stand up. Will the House make them feel welcome?
Gentleman from the 43rd, Delegate Hartman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have today from Jennings Randolph Elementary School in Elkins, Page Andrew Harris, and in the center gallery we have Andrew's parents Scott and Christine Harris. If they would please stand and the House make them welcome.
Gentleman from the 19th, Delegate Hicks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of Delegate Thompson and myself, I'd like to announce that we have some very special pages today from two elementary schools in Wayne County, and that being Cerrito Canova Elementary School and Kellogg. And these pages are Aubrey Bays, Reagan Robleski, and Kaylin Adkins, Kimberly Rousey, and Kylie Norman. Would the House make them welcome?
Gentleman from the 19th, Delegate Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In addition to those, we have some other pages from Kellogg Elementary. So on behalf of myself, Delegate Hicks, Delegate Rohrbach, and Delegate Lovejoy, we have Haley Watson, Haley Mershon, Hannah Campione, Kylie Bailey, and Cameron Hunter. So please give them a welcome. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 1st, Delegate Schwartzmiller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the entire Northern Panhandle delegation and the South Gallery, we have visiting from the Iron Workers 549, Benji Swanson and Sean Curry, and I'd ask the House to give them a warm welcome. Please stand. Thank you.
Reports to standing committees.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 2362 relating to procedures for voting an emergency absentee ballot by qualified voters. Reports back a committee substitute, therefore, with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass.
Report to be received.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 2008 relating to nonpartisan election of justices of the Supreme Court of Appeals. Reports back a committee substitute, therefore, with recommendation that the committee substitute do pass.
Report to be received.
Your Committee on Technology and Infrastructure has had under consideration House Bill 2005, Broadband Expansion Act of 2019. Reports the same back with recommendation that it do pass, that it be referred to Committee on Judiciary.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Your Committee on Judiciary has had under consideration House Bill 2193, providing a specific escheat of U.S. savings bonds. Reports back a committee substitute, therefore, with the recommendation that the committee substitute do pass.
Report to be received. Further reports to standing committees. Reports to select committees. Messages from the executive. Messages from the Senate.
The Clerk of the Senate announces the passage by the Senate of Senate Bill 10 relating to Second Chance Driver's License Program.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Technology and Infrastructure, then the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 24 relating generally to local boards of health.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Political Subdivisions, then the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 27, removing restrictions on where certain traditional lottery games may be played.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 28, removing hotel occupancy tax limit collects for medical care and emergency services.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 36, allowing adjustment of gross income for calculating personal income liability for certain retirees.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Pensions and Retirement, then the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed committee substitute for Senate Bill 106, alleviating double taxation on foreign income at state level.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Small Business, Entrepreneurship, and Economic Development, then the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 177, Fire Commission rule relating to state building code.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 190, DOH rule relating to employment procedures.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Technology and Infrastructure, then the Committee on Judiciary. Entrepreneurship and Economic Development, then the Committee on Finance.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 177, Fire Commission rule relating to state building code.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
The Senate has passed Senate Bill 190, DOH rule relating to employment procedures.
Report to be received. Bill be referred to the Committee on Technology and Infrastructure, then the Committee on Judiciary. Further messages from the Senate. Resolutions.
House Resolution 6, recognizing the importance of West Virginia's energy resources and critical energy infrastructure to support economic development and national security.
Lady from the 49th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with and that they be considered as formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees on the Chamber Automation System.
Lady from the 49th, ask unanimous consent that further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with and that each resolution be considered formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committee as shown on the Chamber Automation System. Is there objection? Is there objection? Chair hears no objection. So ordered. Petitions. Motions. Bills introduced.
House Bill 2010 relating to foster care.
Lady from the 49th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the bills introduced be dispensed with and that they be considered as formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as indicated on the chamber automation system.
Lady from the 49th, ask unanimous consent that further reading of bills introduced be dispensed with and that each bill be considered having formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committee as shown on the chamber automation system. Is there objection? Is there objection? Chair hears none. Be so ordered. Unfinished business. Bills on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2028, limiting supervision of laying of lines on state rights of way.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from the 56th, Delegate Howe, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this bill is to limit the supervision of laying sewer and water lines on states' rights of way. Currently, it is required that a state engineer must be present throughout the entire project when a public service district lays water, sewer lines, utilities, or pipelines on a state right-of-way. Under the proposed bill, an engineer would not be required to be present the full time of construction, but instead would conduct an initial inspection, periodic inspections, and an inspection upon conclusion of the project. I urge passage.
Question before the House is the passage of the bill. Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Delegate from the 67th, Delegate Doyle, your vote is not registering. It's registering now. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on the question. There are 98 yeas, 1 nay. Majority of those members present having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. Are there amendments to the title?
Delegate Howe moves to amend the title.
Delegate Howe moves to amend the title. Question before the House is the title amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. The ayes have it, and the title amendment is adopted. The title as amended by the House will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please report the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. For the bills on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2038, relating to the procedure to determine if an occupation or profession should be regulated.
Gentleman from the 56th, Delegate Howe, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this bill is to not recommend submission of a sunrise application to regulate an occupation or profession if the occupation or profession is regulated in less than 25 states. Regulation could be considered if it is shown that West Virginia is unique and that occupation or profession should be regulated. The bill also directs the legislative auditor to review licensing of professions and occupations every 5 years and recommend sunsetting a regulation if fewer than 25 states regulate the occupation or profession unless it is shown that West Virginia is unique and that occupation or profession should be regulated. I urge passage.
Question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? Gentleman from the 36th, Delegate Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the gentleman yield? I'm wondering, as I read the Part B, it says that the legislative auditors to determine if there's any that do not meet the requirement of having 25 other states. But do you know what agencies or licenses would be subject to the auditors recommending that they be set aside and discontinued in West Virginia?
At this current time, I don't believe we ran across many at all, if any. No, it would be based on the review of the legislative auditor and what they discover, and it would still have to come before this body, and we can always say no.
In other words, we would have to pass legislation to deactivate licenses? And
that is correct. It would not be automatic. It would have to come before this body.
Have you inquired of the legislative auditor at this point if there are any licenses that should be reviewed by this body?
They have not looked at it at this point because it is not law at this point. This law directs them to do that. So going forward, they would begin to look at those on a 5-year cycle.
So we've not really researched if there's any agency or license that could be revoked as a result of the passage of the bill. We don't know. Maybe
this
there are,
bill will create the process in which that research can be conducted.
All right. Thank you, sir. May I speak?
Yes, proceed.
Briefly. Mr. Speaker, I'm uncomfortable with this legislation. I think we should know specifically if there are any licenses that would be subject to the terms of the bill. There's no grandfathering clause, and in fact, it would appear that one of the purposes is to review all the licenses and pull some that aren't agreed to in 25 other states. I'm not sure that West Virginia ever needs to wait on 25 other states for any of its legislation or policy, so I'll be voting against the bill.
Gentleman from the 36th, Delegate Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chairman yield? Mr. Chairman, I have some of the similar concerns as my colleague that, so you're not unaware of any licensures that we're going to get rid of, tomorrow if this would go into effect tomorrow. We don't know which ones would go away or which one would be proposed to get rid of if this legislation would make it through the process.
The bill creates a 5-year cycle where these reviews would be conducted. The review would have to be conducted by the legislative auditor before a recommendation would be made. Then this body would have to act on that recommendation.
So you don't have
and if we deem that it's good to keep that license, then that's what this body will do.
So you don't have the concern that there may be some out there that West Virginia may be an outlier, that we need some regulation or some careful looks at licensing and protection of the public that may be different from 25 other states. You don't have that concern because we're unaware which ones may go away.
That's actually provided for in the bill. If they can show something that's unique to West Virginia, there's not a lot of states in the coal industry that are as heavily into it, so we may have some type of licensing that we feel is necessary because of our uniqueness. Then it says that we will recommend to keep that license, and again, this body would have to act on that.
Now, I know this doesn't happen very often, but what about the case if West Virginia is in front of the curve? We jump out there and we're actually moving forward on something, and we create that licensure and those kind of things. Wouldn't this hamper us and put another step into the process, a little more bureaucracy in between us and getting ahead of the rest of the country?
Again, that's accounted for in the bill on the.
But we have to apply and address it, and it's just one more step that we have to do when we're moving forward.
That's the point of the bill.
To create another step, another part of bureaucracy. That's the point of the bill.
To prevent creating new bureaucracies needlessly is the point of the bill.
So we're gonna get rid of unneeded bureaucracy by creating another piece of bureaucracy in the steps.
I would say by creating an additional review step to prevent from creating a new bureaucracy that is not necessary, then other states, in fact the majority of states, have figured out how to do it without creating bureaucracy, making it easier to create jobs in the state of West Virginia.
But if we're looking at something and we decide it's necessary to move forward, such as marijuana or other things that we may be innovative for, and we're moving forward ahead of the other 25 states or the other 50% of the country, we have one more step that we have to go through before we can do so.
Well, I would hope that this state would not want to be on the forefront of creating bureaucracy, but if we do find something that is unique and we feel we should create a license for that, this body is free to do. Create a license for that, this body is free to do.
Chairman, speak to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed.
I believe this is a well-intended piece of legislation. However, the reason for licensure, the reason for boards and commissions in licensing and professional licensing is to protect the public. So in cases where we have a profession working with the public, the reason for that board or commission is to protect the public from unnecessary or unneeded risk. So if we go into something such as broadband or some technology where we may have the chance to move forward in front of the rest of the country, I think we should look at not putting another step in the way of doing so and address these boards and commissions one by one, such as we've done in the past. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 50th, Delegate Caputo. Mr. Chairman, yield.
Chairman, yield.
Chairman does yield.
Do 25 other states have this legislation?
Probably not. So we're on the forefront, just like the gentleman over here suggests.
Okay. Speak very briefly to the bill, Mr. Speaker.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We ran this bill through committee, and a lot of us were very, very uncomfortable with this. The criteria, unless unique to West Virginia, unique could be in the eye of who's doing the studying or who's leading the charge on that. We just don't think that looking at 25 other states, whether they do something or don't do something, should be a major piece of criteria as to whether we keep a board or commission in place in West Virginia. when I asked the chairman and the council what boards would be different in our state than in other states, he handed me a book that was produced by some think tank, and I'm not sure who it was, but as I reviewed that and looked through boards and commissions in West Virginia, many were not in that book that was provided to the committee. So, and no disrespect to the staff and the chairman on that book, but I'm very, very uncomfortable with it. I think it was produced by someone outside of West Virginia that doesn't know our concerns, that doesn't know our needs. So I will be voting no, and I would encourage others to vote no as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from the 51st, Helga Fleschauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition also. One of the things I wonder about is some kind of fad that takes storm across the country. And I can remember when we didn't regulate tattoos. And we have a lot of our kids that have been tattooed, and I think it is very important that we have sanitary requirements at the state level if something like that should happen again. I don't think we want to wait for 25 states if there's some kind of fad like that in the future. So I think 25 is an arbitrary number. I'm just not comfortable with it, and I'm going to be voting no.
Gentleman from the 15th, Doug Foster.
Will the chairman yield? I understood you to say that this is a recommendation of, it's not that the article or the section will actually be removed, it's a recommendation from the auditor, correct?
That's correct. It would come in, they would give a recommendation that if less than 25 states, that we may look at other ways to regulate that profession. Licensure is a very high level of regulation to protect the public safety, but there are things such as certification, registration, different levels that we could safely protect the public's interest without going to full licensure. All of these make it easier to create jobs in West Virginia. Most of our licensure covers the self-employed, which are people that create their own jobs, and we're trying not to put additional barriers to entry to make it easier to, put people to work in this great state.
And another question is so just to be clear, the auditor can't just remove a licensure with this bill. It would have to be an act of the legislature.
Basically, you're right. It would be an act of the legislature, and they would give us research on what alternatives that we have to regulate a specific profession.
All right, thank you. Speak to the bill.
Please proceed.
Thank you. As indicated, this is a recommendation of the auditor. It's just going to be a review. I mean, I see nothing that harms any licensure as getting more information to us on this licensure and saying hey, what are other states doing? We just get more information, then we know that there's going to be that 25 of the states don't do this or do the licensure. I believe that there's no harm in that, and obviously, I mean, we've received many audits such as there's an education audit, I believe, in 2011 that wasn't acted on, that recommended removal of some of the administrative offices. So just because we receive an audit doesn't mean we have to act on it, and that is at our discretion. So I would encourage the passage of this bill.
Gentleman from the 2nd, Delegate Desario.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in opposition to this bill as well. Along with my friend, I agree with my friend from Marion County that there was many discrepancies in the list in the book of the licensures, as well as with the sunsetting of this licensures. If you're try to do something as simple as change the scope of your practice, it was stated in committee that could take up to 9 months to get squared away. So I would also rise against this and ask the same from my colleagues.
Does the gentleman from the 56th, Delegate Howe, wish to close debate?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill would not affect any existing board if it passes. There's not going to be an instant bill the next day to remove any licensure in the state. What it'll do is it'll create a review process where we will go through every 5 years and look over these and see how other states are doing this. Is there a better way to do this? Only if less than 25 states license this profession. The gentlelady from the 51st talked about tattoo artists. We protect the public safety of tattoo artists through the health department without licensure. as many other states do. So if this was to come before this body, they would say, hey, less than 25 states license this profession. This is how they're protecting the public safety. We can do the same thing, making it easier to people to get into that specific profession. There is no sunset provisions for any licensure in this bill. It is only recommendations of what this body can do, and this body has to act before any licensure will be changed to any other thing. We have to act, and anyone can introduce a bill at any time to create a licensure, whether this bill passes or not. So it is up to this body to protect our people from burdensome regulation, creating new bureaucracies, and making it harder to create jobs in our state. I urge passage.
Question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On that question, 60 yeas, 39 nays, 1 member absent not voting. Majority of those delegates present having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. Clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2038.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title is read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. Clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and ask concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2128, allowing state employees to take paid leave to attend parent-teacher conference for their children.
Gentleman from the 56th, Delegate Howe, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this bill is to allow state employees to take paid leave to attend parent-teacher conferences for their children. Employees are eligible each year to use paid leave to attend parent-teacher conferences to be credited against the employee's annual sick leave benefits and include a provision for travel time. I urge passage.
Question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? If not, the question before the House is the passage of the bill. Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on that question. 97 ayes, 2 nays, 1 member absent not voting. More than a majority of those present having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. Clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2128.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. Clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2183, clarified where a charge of DUI may be brought against an individual.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Schott, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning. This bill has limited application but reinforces the important right to act stupid on your own property. And the fact that that is an important right basically was confirmed by this body when we passed this bill 98-2 last session. By way of background, for many years here in West Virginia, our DUI law, and that's the only extent of the scope of this bill, is the application to the DUI law. It was not construed to operate upon individuals who were operating a vehicle while under the influence if those individuals were on strictly private property. This did not as last session. By way of background, for many years here in West Virginia, our DUI law, and that's the only extent of the scope of this bill, is the application to the DUI law. It was not construed to operate upon individuals who were operating a vehicle while under the influence if those individuals were on strictly private property. This did not, as a matter of statute, include private property which was, quote, generally open to the public. However, in 2012, a gentleman whose last name was Beckett was cited for operating an ATV on a family-owned farm. Like many folks who feel necessary when they operate that piece of dangerous equipment, he had it imbibed in some liquid courage. And as a result, he was charged with being intoxicated and driving that vehicle while his license was suspended. That case was appealed to our Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld that conviction. And here's the quote. The Supreme Court interpreted our statute to extend the reach of our driving under the influence laws to any individual driving a vehicle within the physical boundaries of the state. That's the key clause of that holding. Anywhere within the physical boundaries of the state, even if that vehicle is driven only upon private property, not open to the general public. What this bill attempts to do is place in the code language which clarifies this application. This is important. This year's version, this is the only distinction between this year's version and what was passed last year. It continues to allow an intoxicated person to be charged with DUI if that DUI causes injury or death, even if those type of situations occur on private property. So in other words, it's not intended to allow someone to escape responsibility for harms that they cause to other people. Now, currently, a DUI can be statutorily enforced against individuals operating a vehicle anywhere in the state. This bill adds language that clarifies that DUIs may only be assessed against individuals operating a vehicle upon a private highway or private road, and that's a term of art, by the way, meaning either every way or place in private ownership and used for vehicular travel by the owner and those having express or implied permission from the owner, but not by other persons. This would include, for instance, private streets in a subdivision or roads connecting parking areas at a business. What the bill does is add language that a private road does not include private roads in any circumstances where the operator or driver is operating the vehicle on his or her own property and has not left or does not intend to leave that property to drive upon a public highway. This is intended to allow a driver, now that's clarification, is intended to allow a driveway to be arrested for a DUI if he or she has entered a parking lot. In other words, if you come from a private highway or public highway onto a parking lot and are pursued onto that parking lot, you can still be held and arrested for DUI. Or if you intend to leave that parking lot and drive on a public highway, you're still subject to being arrested for DUI. But if you're solely operating on private property, your own property, you cannot be charged with DUI, regardless of what you consume. For instance, if you're riding a lawnmower and you needed some encouragement to ride the lawnmower and were intoxicated on your own property, you could not be arrested for DUI. Similarly, your own private vehicle, an ATV, and so forth. It does not affect civil liability, okay? Only the application of the DUI criminal statute. So if you damage somebody's property or hurt somebody, obviously you can be held civilly liable. Mr. Speaker, that is the extent of the bill. I urge its passage.
Question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Are there members who wish to speak to the passage of the bill? Gentleman from the 36th, Delegate Rowe.
Yes, would the gentleman yield?
Chairman does yield.
Yes.
So I understand it. It has to be on a road. It can't be just going across the meadows of somebody else's property for someone to be charged with DUI. They have to be on a road, correct?
A private road would include a road that's open to the public, even if it's not publicly maintained. Right. But the only exception in this bill basically is operating on your own property without the intent to either enter a public or private road that's used by others or exiting a private road or public road that's used by others. Solely on your own property. Very limited application.
Okay, as I understand it, the Supreme Court has said anywhere in West Virginia, if you're operating a motor vehicle and you're under the influence, then it's illegal and you can be charged with a DUI, correct?
That is the current state of the law.
And so when we vote this bill, we'll be limiting that general provision to places that are roads, not just open fields or forests, but roads.
No, that's not the correct interpretation.
Is road defined to be something other than what we usually think of a road as being, you know, like meadows or forests?
No, no, it's not. Well, I'm not. And I'm sorry, if you'd repeat, you're concerned about private meadows, is that it?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, ATVs are commonly operated through forests and meadows and places other than on roads.
Right.
And we're assuming private property here. As I understand the bill, it will limit any liability, or excuse me, will limit any criminal activity for being under the influence if you're off a private road. And I think it makes it clear at the very
The
end.
interpretation of the bill is that you could be charged if you cause somebody else harm, injury, death to someone else anywhere, regardless of what it is. Otherwise, you're immunized from prosecution for a DUI if you operate on your own private property. That's the scope of the bill.
And that includes roads. In other words, if you own the real estate, whether it's a road or not, you have immunity from a DUI.
Correct.
Okay, but if you don't own it, if someone else owns it, you're liable for a DUI on a road. And the question is are you also liable in a meadow or a forest that is not a road if it's on someone else's property?
My interpretation would be yes. Yes, you would be. This would not provide any immunity for that.
What about, I mean, it's the definition of road that troubles me. It seems to be limited to a road and is very confusing if it's intended to cover or extend to a non-road property that's privately owned by somebody else.
I guess all I can tell you, sir, is I have a different interpretation than you do of the bill and the.
Is there anything you can point to in the bill that would give me direction on that, sir?
There are definitions contained in 17C11. That's probably where you'd have to look to determine the extent of the definition of private road.
And those definitions would make it clear that it's not just the roadway where someone could be charged, but it could be meadows and forests as well.
I don't know if the term meadow is in that section, but I believe it's broadly construed in that definition.
Thank you, sir.
Gentleman from the 27th, Delegate Porterfield.
I'd like to ask the chairman to yield.
Chairman does yield.
Certainly.
To my colleague and friend, I maybe should have got this yesterday, but being new, I hope you'll forgive this, but in the scope of this bill, is it limited to if someone is driving on their own property, and I think people do have the rights to do what they want on their own property, but would they be allowed to transport other people? For example, if my wife were intoxicated and wanted to drive me around the farm, and I don't know would she be liable for DUI even if we did not have an accident? Could she still put my life in danger with that being intoxicated under this bill?
With respect to the charge of DUI, if she was driving the vehicle on your private property and no one was hurt, she would not be subject to a DUI charge under the limited application of this bill. Now, if she hurt you or if there are civil responsibilities, it would not insulate her from. Any type of civil liability.
Is there a way to potentially change that or moving forward that if someone is going to ride around intoxicated on their own property, they could still be held liable for DUI if they had other people in their vehicle? Is that possible?
theoretically, you can make any amendment you wish, but we're on third reading, not second reading, where amendments are generally offered. If you feel strongly about that, you could certainly recommend to the Senate, if this bill's taken up in the Senate Judiciary or elsewhere, that they further limit the scope of the bill.
And I'm very sorry that that was not done on second reading, would have been able to do that, but getting familiar with the rules, chairman, colleague, and mentor, I just felt it was something for public safety that needs to be addressed and hopefully will be considered. Maybe this be voted down this time and then reevaluated another time. Thank you.
Certainly.
Gentleman from the 29th, Delegate Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to just speak in favor of the bill. To address the gentleman from the 36th, this bill provides a provision that if your intent was to leave your property or you had been found off of your property and re-entering your property, you would still be able to be charged with a DUI. And to the gentleman from the 27th, you're talking about a situation with potential harm for others. There's no alteration to DUI causing bodily injury or DUI causing death. That could still be charged on your own private property. So, you know, I think we're getting a little confused about the parameters of the bill. As the chairman said, this was highly limited. It's highly limited to a very finite situation to address some misunderstanding in the code that has occurred over the years. And I would urge everyone to support the bill.
Gentleman from the 23rd, Delegate Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the chairman would please yield.
Chairman does yield.
Certainly.
Thank you. I know we briefly touched on this in committee, but I'm not sure if you or staff have had an opportunity to look a little bit further. The impact of this as it relates to our trail systems in West Virginia, the Hatfield-McCoy trails and things like that. And at least for the benefit of everyone that didn't have the opportunity to listen to our discussion, what kind of implications would it have for that?
Well, I'd first say that you have no immunity for DUI driving anywhere other than on your private property. So to the extent the current law would cover that, I believe that, at least in southern West Virginia, the trail system is operated pursuant to license agreements with landowners, and they are given authority to enforce the law throughout the trail system. And to my understanding, I believe I'm personally aware of a couple of situations. And when I say personally aware, it doesn't mean I was operating the ATV at the time. But I know of a couple places where DUI citations were given for operating, in addition to being intoxicated, in violation of the rules of the trail system, which forbid alcoholic beverages. So if you're asking me whether you, even with this bill, you could still be prosecuted for DUI while operating an ATV on a trail system, in my opinion, you could be, regardless of whether you hurt somebody, and most certainly if you hurt somebody.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 60th, Delegate Wilson.
Speaker, I'll make it quick. Mr. Chairman, would you please yield? Point of clarification, please, sir.
Certainly.
Okay, so the only thing this bill does, if I understand correctly, is it allows me to imbibe a beer and operate a motor vehicle on my personal property.
It would not penalize you if that beer resulted in you becoming intoxicated while you were operating that vehicle on your own property.
Thank you for clarifying, sir. I assure you one beer wouldn't do it for me.
All right.
So just to clarify a little further, I live on a private road, but it's not my private road. If I drive on that private road, I am still subject to
Yes, you are.
incarceration for DUI.
Yes, you
right?
are.
Okay, so if I drive on my personal property, whether it's on a road, with a toad, in the rain, on a train, doesn't matter. It's my personal private property. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 51st, Delegate Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman yield?
Chairman does yield.
I have a follow-up question related to the question about whether this would apply on trails. The way I read the insertions is that instead of driving a vehicle in this state, the bill would now change the code to a vehicle on any public highway or private road in the state. So my question is, would a trail qualify as a public highway or private road?
Yes, I believe that would fall within the definition of either a private road or a public road, depending on how open the trail is for public for the public to access. For instance, in the trail system, you're supposed to have a license that you purchase through the trail system, which would probably convert that to a private road. In either case, we have a lot of difficulty with what's called outlaw trails down our way, which are trails that are used but are not part of the trail system. So I think under the broad definition of public road or private road, if it's available to the public, it would fall within here. The trail would. If it's controlled in some way, it still would qualify as a private road under the definition of private road.
Thank you.
Gentleman from 27th, Delegate Porterfield.
Am I on? Yeah. In clarification to my colleague from the 29th, my point very clearly is a point of concern because it involves someone else. If someone wants to drink on their own property and operate a motor vehicle, that's between them and their conscience. But if other people are a part of that, then there needs to be liability, because what about the 25 times they put their life in danger and put other people's lives in danger doing it? Then one time we have something catastrophic happens, sure, we can charge them with DUI then. The scope of the bill I clearly understand and where it is to be. But if this is going to be passed, it needs to be no passenger at all allowed within the scope of that liability. If they have a passenger, they should be liable for DUI. That's all. Thank you.
Does the chairman wish to close debate? If not, the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on this question. 97 yeas, 2 nays, 1 member absent not voting. More than a majority of those present having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. Clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2183.
Are there amendments to the title? If not, the title is read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. Clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate and request concurrence therein. Further bills on third reading. Bills on second reading.
House Bill 2185 relating to the removal of animals left unattended in motor vehicles.
Are there amendments?
Committee on Judiciary moves to amend the bill. This is H. Jude AM 1-11.
Gentleman from 27th, Delegate Schott to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And for the benefit of our new members, what we're voting on is what's called a strike and insert amendment, which basically is a rewrite of the original bill, as opposed to a targeted amendment. And the reason that we had to use a strike and insert amendment in the Committee on the Judiciary is that this bill was second referenced to Finance. However, after it left our committee, we got a waiver of that second reference. So we basically will be voting on the bill when we vote on this strike and insert amendment. And so I will be explaining to you the entire bill as it is affected by the strike and insert. And unfortunately, we'll probably be saying the same thing to you again tomorrow, since we'll be voting on the bill on third reading. However, to add some variety, we'll have someone else speak tomorrow as opposed to me. All right. So what this bill does, it permits the removal of animals left unattended in motor vehicles where there is a danger of physical injury due to exposure to conditions of extreme cold, heat, or insufficient air or water. Currently, under our code at 61-819, a crime is established for leaving an animal unattended and confined in a motor vehicle when physical injury to or death of the animal is likely. What this bill does, it designates agents who may lawfully intervene to rescue an animal confined in a vehicle. And those agents, in other words, these are the persons who are authorized to operate under this bill: a humane officer, EMS personnel, law enforcement personnel, or paid firemen or local volunteer fire department members. The committee amendment added language indicating the agent acting in their official capacity may enter the vehicle. We added the language in their official capacity to make it clear, to give them that protection. Members of the public are not authorized as an intervening agent. In other words, if you break the window to try to to save the animal that's confined, you could be still liable for any injuries or damages to the vehicle. What you'd need to do is call one of these individuals, humane officer, EMS personnel, law enforcement, or firefighters, either local or paid firefighters. So what happens with these folks? They're allowed to intervene when the animal is left unattended in a vehicle, exposed to conditions of extreme heat, cold, and insufficient ventilation, if those conditions may trigger physical injury or death of the animal. That agent then can enter the vehicle for the sole purpose of assisting the animal, but cannot search the vehicle or seize any items found in the vehicle unless they're otherwise permitted by law. In other words, this does not give an excuse to search someone's vehicle if you don't otherwise have cause to do so. If the animal is retrieved, the agent must first leave written notice. That notice has to be in a secure and conspicuous location on or in the motor vehicle bearing the officer's name and title and the address of the location where the animal may be retrieved. The animal may retrieve the animal only after payment of all charges for the maintenance, care, medical treatment, and impoundment of the animal have been paid, or, and this is an amendment was made in the committee, arrangements are made to provide suitable arrangements to provide for that payment over time. If all those conditions are met, the agent and his employer are immune from criminal or civil liability. The committee amendment also added the judicial discretion to direct for a psychological examination of the person who essentially imprisoned the animal, and as to future possession of that animal in the future. All of those are within the discretion of the court. Mr. Speaker, I urge adoption of the amendment.
Question before the House is on the adoption of the amendment. Are there members who wish to speak to the adoption of the amendment? If not, the question before the House is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2307 relating to creating a provisional license for practicing barbering and cosmetology.
Are there amendments? Bill will be advanced. Further bills on second reading. Bills on first reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 2190 modifying bail requirements.
Bill will be advanced.
House Bill 2311 exempting short-term license holders to submit information to the State Tax Commission once the term of permit has expired.
Bill will be advanced. Further bills on first reading. Leaves of absence. Lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for our colleague, Delegate Coles.
Is there objection that leave of absence be granted? If not, leaves are so granted. Remarks by members of the House. Gentleman from the 66th, Delegate Espinoza.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Briefly, wanted to bring members' attention to a document that you hopefully found on your desk. Some of you might have actually received it in your office as well. It's entitled West Virginia Department of Education Staffing. Earlier in some of the debate, it was discussed, or the education efficiency audit was mentioned. That was the 2012 education efficiency audit of West Virginia's primary and secondary education system. And one of the findings of that audit was that West Virginia, at the time of that audit, had one of the lowest ratios of staff to students. As a matter of fact, West Virginia at that time had one agency staffer for every 419.3 students. That was second in the country only to Alaska, that had one agency staffer for 206.6 students. And a couple years ago, then Superintendent of Schools Dr. Michael Martirano had provided this kind of breakdown of staffing, because I think it was, we often heard about the amount of bureaucracy in our state public education system, but without really knowing where those staffers are, really difficult to assess whether we have the right number of staff positions in our public education bureaucracy. And you can see that as a result of some of the legislation we've enacted, you'll recall House Bill 2711 that transitioned away from REISs to local cooperatives, also House Bill 4006, and others. We have made progress in cooperation with the Senate and the Governor's Office and the Department of Education, and significantly, I think, impacting in a positive way that bureaucracy, bringing it down to a more manageable level. And again, what I really like about this chart is that it really tells you where exactly the remaining bureaucracy is. I think there's a tendency to believe that the bureaucracy is all over here at Building 6, whereas if you look at this chart, you see that actually over in Building 6, there are 261 staffers, 164 of which are state-funded positions and 97 that are federal positions. And then you can, again, look across the bottom of the chart and see fairly clearly where exactly those staff positions are. And I certainly encourage the House Education Committee and others to continue to look very closely at these areas. And hopefully this document will be helpful in guiding your investigation to, again, ensure that we are right-sizing West Virginia state government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further remarks by members of the House? Introduction to guests. Gentleman from the 7th, Delegate Harshbarger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had the honor today to recognize the 2018 Ritchie County Rebels Cross Country Class A Championships. So, championship team, boys championship team. So if they can please rise. With them is their coach, Holly Haddix Vaughn and Paula Hogue. So if the House would please make them welcome. Have one more. And I have two other guests with me today, two beautiful ladies inside and out, my wife, Michelle, and my daughter, Mackenzie. Will the House please make them welcome?
Further introduction to the guests. Miscellaneous business. If not, the lady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move subject to announcement that the House adjourn until 11 a.m. tomorrow.
Lady from the 49th moves that subject to announcements, the House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow, Friday, January the 18th. Are there announcements? Gentleman from the 10th, Delegate Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Finance will meet Friday morning at 9 a.m. for the Supreme Court budget hearing. To note, for the first time in 155 years, it will be this body's decision on how the Supreme Court will spend their money. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 35th, Delegate Capito.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., the House Judiciary Committee will meet in the committee room, and the agenda will be posted.
Gentleman from the 21st, Delegate Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., your Committee on Education will meet in the Education Committee room. The agenda is posted.
Gentleman from the 28th, Delegate Pack.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Government Organization will meet tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in the House Government Organization Committee room. The agenda is posted. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, Republican members of this House will caucus here in the chamber today at 5 p.m.
Gentleman from the 9th, Delegate Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Committee on Prevention and Treatment of Substance Abuse will meet today at 3:30 in Government Org. The agenda is posted.
Gentleman from the 17th, Delegate Rohrbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of both the Prevention, Treatment, and Substance Abuse Committee, as well as the Health and Human Resources Committee, are invited to a lunch and learn today in the House Government Organization Room immediately following the session. We're going to meet with the West Virginia Association of Alcoholism and Drug Abuse Counselors. And also, your Committee on Seniors, Children, and Family Issues will meet at 1 o'clock today in Government Organization. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 41st, Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a reminder, your Committee on Health and Human Resources will meet today at 2 p.m. in the House Health Committee room, 215E. Republicans will caucus in the Chairman's office at 1:30.
Gentleman from the 10th, Delegate Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Energy will meet today at 2 p.m. in the Judiciary Conference Room. The agenda is posted.
Gentleman from the 12th, Delegate Westfall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Subcommittee on House Bill 2378 will meet at 12:15 in the Judiciary Committee room. It's House Bill 2378. It's an education bill. Thank you, sir.
12:15 today. Thank you. Gentleman from the 36th, Delegate Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of Kanawha County will be meeting with the Kanawha County Commission tomorrow at 8 a.m. in the Lou McManus room. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 50th, Delegate Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the Democratic Caucus will meet today, immediately following the floor session in room 252. Democrats in room 252.
Lady from the 32nd, Delegate Staggers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In room 230, the Democratic Caucus for Health and Human Resources will meet at 1:45. That's a move back from 1:30 that I announced yesterday.
Are there further announcements? Are there further announcements? If not, the question before the House is the motion by the lady from the 49th that the House stand adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow, Friday, January 18th. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed will say no. Ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. The House is adjourned until 11 a.m. tomorrow.